Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Grateful to have you here for this ongoing series of discussions with the Dean. That's me, Dr. Pete Gathje. I'm the academic dean here at Memphis Theological Seminary in Memphis, Tennessee. And this is a breakthrough discussion with the Dean. We're going international since John McTavish is coming to us live from Canada. So our agenda is we're pretty informal here. I'll do a brief introduction, and then we will move right into a kind of discussion of John's book, which is really a fun book to read. And I'm looking forward to having a good discussion tonight. So briefly, Reverend John McTavish is a United Church of Canada minister. He lives in Huntsville, Ontario, Canada. And he's the author of several books. I'll highlight one other besides the one that we're talking about tonight, which caught my attention, Myth and Gospel in the Fiction of John Updike. So one of the great things about getting to know John over the last week or so is a mutual like of Updike, and kind of encouraging me to go back and do some reading of John Updike again. So John, tell me, how long have you been in the ministry?
Since 1966. 67. What am I saying? 67. I studied at Emmanuel College in Toronto.
Okay.
And then did a year of after that in Edinburgh at New College, and then came to a pastorate not too far from where I am right now, actually.
Great. And I just see in our chat that we have a participant with us tonight who is joining us from Nigeria.
Wow.
That's that might be another first for discussions with the Dean.
That's marvelous.
That's wonderful. Well, people may be wondering a little bit about how a minister in Canada got connected with a dean, an academic dean in Memphis, Tennessee. So let me tell a little bit of that backstory, and then we'll get right into this book, which the title of the book is Jesus and Elvis, Creative Resources for Schools and Churches. And a few weeks ago, our seminary president here, Dr. Jody Hill, received an email from John saying that he had this book out and maybe it would be a resource for our library. And Dr. Hill did what he always does with things that he doesn't exactly know what to do with. He sends them on to the dean. So I got the email. The email was forwarded to me, and the title immediately intrigued me. At Memphis, we certainly have a connection with Elvis, the so-called king of rock and roll. And we certainly have a connection, we hope, too, with Jesus, especially with Jesus as the King of Kings. So I was intrigued, and I thought, oh, maybe this is a book that explores the theological connections between Jesus and Elvis, which would be an interesting read. But no, it's a much better book than that. So I read in the first page that Jesus proclaims the book's unabashed gospel-centered content, Elvis, its unapologetic creative style. So we're kind of doing a mash of Jesus and Elvis, a kind of creative joining together of literature, music, the performing arts, with how this can be a resource for the church. So I opened the book up a little bit further, and I came across a poem that I'll share at this point. It's a short poem by E.E. Cummings that's called "I Am a Little Church, No Great Cathedral." And I read, "I am a little church, no great cathedral, far from the splendor and squalor of hurrying cities. I do not worry if briefer days grow briefest. I am not sorry when sun and rain make April. My life is the life of the reaper and the sower. My prayers are prayers of earth's own clumsily striving, finding and losing and laughing and crying children, whose any sadness or joy is my grief or my gladness. Around me surges a miracle of unceasing birth and glory and death and resurrection. Over my sleeping self float flaming symbols of hope, and I wake to a perfect patience of mountains. I am a little church, far from the frantic world with its rapture and anguish, at peace with nature. I do not worry if longer nights grow longest. I am not sorry when silence becomes singing. Winter by spring, I lift my diminutive spire to merciful Him, whose only now is forever, standing erect in the deathless truth of His presence, welcoming humbly His light and proudly His darkness. And I just love that poem by E.E. Cummings. And I especially love it because one of the things that we do here at Memphis Theological Seminary is we prepare people for ministry not only in urban areas, but in rural areas where such small churches do stand. Sometimes it looks lonely out in the countryside, though really belied.
In the grand scheme of things, we're all pretty tiny churches, aren't we?
Yes. And so this intrigued me, and then I thought, let's have a discussion with this author. Let's go deeper than just the first page and find out what other riches are in this book. So I reached out to John, and here we are. So John, tell me a little bit about why you put this book together. Where'd you get the idea to do Jesus and Elvis?
Well, basically, I just realized after I retired that I had a lot of material sitting around in my study. And over the years, a lot of that material came to mean a great deal to me, but I had to be selective and critical, and I went through it and pulled out the gems and preserved some of these gems in the form of this book. So there are poems, there are plays, there's music, there's some brief essays that have meant a lot to me. And I'm proud to say that there was nothing that I put in that I didn't really totally believe in, both theologically and aesthetically.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's one of the things that I really love about this book is that it's a resource for prayer, for worship, for growth in the spiritual life that has poems and music and plays, and it's not your usual prayer book, and I like that. I like a resource that engages us as people who are multi-dimensioned and have a strong character. So maybe we could lift up one of the poems that you had pointed to as about the importance of congregational participation and how we grow in our lives in discipleship.
Thank you. Well, this is a poem by Ann Weems, Presbyterian writer, called "Where is the Church?" And what I suggest, there are 11 stanzas, and I suggest we just do the first 4 stanzas. Mm-hmm. And I'll read the first stanza, Pete, and then if you read the second stanza, I'll read the third, and then you read the fourth, and that will give your students, I hope, a flavor, a sense of the poem anyway. But the idea is that after an appropriate passage, such as 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul talks about how we are members of the body of Christ, each of us a limb or organ of it, then this would be planned spontaneity. I mean, you could do it any number of ways, but you could have different people of different age groups, very young as well as very old, stand up wherever they are seated. They might need microphones, may not, and just share one of the stanzas, and then somebody else from 4 rows over or 10 rows back shares a second stanza, and so on. So let's start now. The Church of Jesus Christ is where a child brings a balloon, is where old women come to dance, is where young men see visions and old men dream dreams.
The Church of Jesus Christ is where lepers come to be touched, is where the blind see and the deaf hear, is where the lame run and the dying live.
The Church of Jesus Christ is where daisies bloom out of barren land, is where children lead and wise men follow, is where mountains are moved and walls come tumbling down.
The Church of Jesus Christ is where loaves of bread are stacked in the sanctuary to feed the hungry, is where coats are taken off and put on the backs of the naked, is where shackles are discarded and kings and shepherds sit down to life together.
Thank you. And it goes on from there, right?
Yeah. And on this day, it's really it's a significant day here in the United States as the trial of Derek Chauvin. A verdict was reached and he was declared guilty on all 3 accounts. And this poem, it speaks to me in this context of that the church is not simply in a sanctuary, but it's in the streets. It's with people all over in all sorts of conditions of life. And in these days in particular, when in the United States, there's such a need for justice and for the proclamation of Black Lives Matter, that it seems like a poem like this intersects so well with the spirit of this age, of where the Church of Jesus Christ needs to be. And I think that's part of the richness of this poem, but also how this book is speaking to the entirety of our lives and not simply what might happen in the sanctuary. So maybe we could talk a little bit about this play to give folks a sense of some of the drama that's in the book. And this is really a powerful one, The Face of Jesus. Say a little bit about the background of this.
Face of Jesus was written by Pat Wells, and we've presented this play on a number of occasions. Barabbas and Jesus. Barabbas can be standing behind a lectern. Jesus could be standing behind the pulpit. You could do it various ways, but the two have a dialogue, and we won't be able to read all of it, of course, but why don't we read the first 2.5 pages, and I'll take the role of Barabbas, and if you'll take the role of Jesus, we'll go from there.
All right, sounds good.
Welcome to Death Row.
Death Row?
Yeah, there's just 4 of us here. You don't play poker, do you? We could get up a game.
Who are the other 2?
Or a couple buddies of mine got caught stealing. Just thieves. Hey, what you in for?
I'm not sure.
Ah, you mean you're innocent? Welcome to the club.
Well, I think it's called aggravated conspiracy to cause dissension.
Hey, that's a new one. Who dreamed that up?
Our religious leaders.
No kidding. Oh, well, I guess what I'm in for.
Murder? Sedition?
What does that mean?
Well, it means you tried to overthrow the government. You killed people. You raped.
Okay, whatever. Anyway, my name's Jesus. What's yours?
Hey, that's my name too.
Well, my old man was Abbas. So, well, I'm really Jesus Bar Abbas, but you can call me Barabbas. I mean, everybody else does.
Well, I'm just Jesus Bar Joseph.
Your old man was Joseph.
Yeah, in a way.
What do you mean, in a way? Was he or wasn't he?
It's kind of complicated.
Oh, yeah. Hey, what? Why do you keep looking at me like that?
Like what?
You despise me, don't you?
Not at all.
You've got that holier than thou look in your eyes. I can tell. Just because I'm a murderer and you didn't kill nobody, you think you're better than me, don't you?
Not at all.
Okay. You feel sorry for me then.
Well, yes, I do.
Well, I don't need your pity. Don't waste your precious pity on me, Jesus Bar Joseph. Who are you to pity anybody anyhow? You know, we're both going to hang, you know, and when they take us down, we'll both be dead as doornails.
That's why I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, well, like I say, I don't need your pity. You can feel sorry for yourself.
Well, it's not exactly pity.
What is it then?
Try compassion.
Compassion? What's that?
Well, love. You know what love is, don't you?
Yeah, well, my definition of love probably ain't the same as yours, buddy.
Did you love your mother?
Of course I did. But I wasn't the only one.
Tell me about her.
My old lady?
Yes.
Okay, put it this way. I don't know who my father was, except he was some guy called Abbas. I only had one father. But I sure had lots of uncles, if you get my drift.
Yeah, I get your drift.
What about your old lady?
My mother?
Yeah, what's she like?
She's a sweet, brave lady who long ago wrapped me in swaddling clothes and laid me in a manger. She's the woman who sits behind a computer all day making data entries. She's the woman who works in a home for people with AIDS and holds their hands when they die. She's the woman in India who sweeps the streets all day with a broom.
What about the lady who sits on a bar stool with a drink in her hands and says, "Hi, you handsome, new in town?" Is she your mother?
Yes.
Then maybe we're brothers.
Maybe we are.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think this starts to give folks, I hope, a sense of the richness that's in here and how we get engaged in a variety of levels, not just up in the head, but also in the heart, as we enter into the story of Jesus and the life of faith in a way that's dramatic and not simply intellectual. One of the other pieces that I thought we might look at, well, let's pause for just a minute and see if if folks have any questions for John that they would like to ask. And people are welcome to ask questions in the chat through the chat feature, or that you can do through the Q&A. Those are both at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if anybody has questions, we have lots of rich material to share. But we've had already some shared. I'd like to give people an opportunity to ask questions or make comments as they might be led to do. And this is in a webinar without the the other attendees being visible, this is the ultimate silent classroom sometimes. And as folks are maybe thinking about that, let's think about Christmas Eve here as we're just in April and we've just come out of Easter, but no time like the present to think about Christmas. I don't know how many shopping days are left before we get there, but there might be a few. So, John, you'd written about, let's imagine that it's Christmas Eve and COVID is finally behind us. What would we do with this choral reading that starts on page 130?
The great thing about this choral reading is that people from the age of 3 to 103 can all get involved and do get involved, especially in the terrific atmosphere of a Christmas Eve service. So just to give a taste of this, but well, we'll go through the whole thing, but Pete, if you will represent the congregation and respond to my lines.
Okay.
I think we'll have an idea of what it's like. Moo, said the cow.
Ding a dong, said the bell. Is that what
yeah. Moo, said the cow. So you say the same thing.
Okay. Moo, said the cow.
Ding a dong, said the bell.
Ding a dong, said the bell.
Brr, said the shepherds as the chill night fell.
Brr, said the shepherds as the chill night fell.
Tax, said Cyrenius, the governor of Syria.
Tax, said Cyrenius, the governor of Syria.
Yes, said the kings, gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Gifts, said the kings, gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Full, said the landlord, take them to the stable.
Full, said the landlord, take them to the stable.
Let them sleep, said Mary, for the world has yet to stir.
Let them sleep, said Mary, for the world has yet to stir. Let me ask you a question, John, that's come through the chat. I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat, but
no, I have.
Great question from one of our participants that said she's enjoying the reading so far, but I'm still not understanding why Elvis, which is a fun question of what's Elvis got to do with this book?
It's a very, very good question. Jesus, of course, is the King of Kings and certainly the King of Elvis. But in his own little way, which is not that little, but in terms of the infinities that are involved here, it's small enough, just as we're all small enough. But in his own little way, Elvis too is a king and represents a certain kind of leadership that wells out of humanity, and that's not to be minimized. God himself doesn't minimize it. And so there are two kings on very different levels of being, but nevertheless there's interaction. And right from the beginning, it became very clear that Jesus was not so proud that he didn't resent the little kings around him. And he reached out and affirmed them just as he affirmed everybody. So there's this kind of relationship going on between the King of Kings and the King of Rock and Roll, between God and the creature. And there's an infinite qualitative distinction between the two, but at the same time, God bridges that distinction to surely what the incarnation is all about, and draws near to us, so near as to be torn apart on the cross, and yet there it is, Emmanuel, God with us. So often things are played off against each other. You're either Christian or you're either secularist or something like that. And surely it's more a case of both, and in an appropriate way that gives faith is on a different level altogether. But nevertheless, it's not something antagonistic here. It's something loving and together. And Jesus and Elvis, in that sense, belong together.
You know, it makes me think of another great singer and performer who wasn't exactly contemporary with Elvis, but was certainly at her peak in the 1960s and 70s and even into the 80s, who bridges this gap between the secular and the spiritual in her life and in her music. And I'm thinking of Aretha Franklin. And, you know, the way in which, I mean, she comes out of the church. And she's raised in the church, and her musical sensibilities are formed by the church, very much like Elvis, a very different kind of church, but nonetheless shaped in the church, and then brings that music out into the world in the kind of vibrancy of the music. The lyrics are changed. The music itself has changed somewhat too, and yet you can certainly hear the African-American church resonating in the rhythm of Aretha Franklin.
Wow.
So, and we're both showing our age by, talking about Elvis and Aretha. But I think that there are probably similar artists today as well. Maybe some of the younger folks, if we have younger folks who are on the webinar, might even make some suggestions about where people could turn today to see this incarnational intersection that you were talking about, John, between the creativity of music, of plays, of poems, as a kind of divine spark that can speak to us even when it's not specifically religious language.
How true. How very, very true.
I mean, the one direct reference to Jesus and Elvis that's in the book, other than the opening page, is this wonderful poem by John Updike that's called Jesus and Elvis on page 41. Maybe you could read that for us, John.
20 years after the death, St. Paul was sending the first of his epistles and bits of myth or faithful memory. Multitudes fed on scraps. The dead small girl told, Talitha Kumi. We're self-assembling as proto-gospels. 20 years since pills and chili burgers did another in. They gather at Graceland, the simple believers, the turnpike pilgrims from the sere Midwest, mother and daughter, bleached to look alike, Marys and Lazaruses, you and me, brains riddled with song, with hand-tinted visions of a lovely young man, reckless and cool as a lily. He lives. We live. He lives. I explained at the end here that, well, maybe I could just read this
yes.
ending or the introduction to the poem. the enigmatic conclusion of the poem, he lives, we live, he lives, this conclusion recalls the words of Jesus, because I live, you all will live. In other words, because the crucified and risen Christ lives, we all live, even though we die. And because we all live, our culture, including the music of Elvis, lives. In other words, he, Jesus, lives, we live, he, Elvis, lives. We say amen to this, and Elvis himself would be the first to say amen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure. He was a very religious man, wasn't he, in his own way?
Was in his own way, and it's certainly, I don't know if you've ever visited Graceland, John. If you haven't, you need to come down and visit us in Memphis.
You need to come down. Yes, we do need to come down.
Because it is it's quite an experience, and it is a place of pilgrimage for so many people, and it's of course there are the sort of the sacred sites at Graceland and the holy relics that are preserved, and it's a kind of secularized, if this makes any sense at all, a kind of secularized holy place. And so it strikes me, I'll compare it to another place that's supposed to be holy, but is kind of secularized in its own strange way, which is the Vatican in Rome, which has the aura of pilgrimage. Certainly, people go there on pilgrimage, and some of it's very moving, and some of it's very commercial, and some of it's, quite frankly, quite cheesy. And maybe that, I don't know, I haven't been to a lot of pilgrimage sites, but all that together.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me turn to another question for you, and related to what you have in the book. And how would you envision people using this book in their life of ministry or their life of discipleship?
Well, the poems lend themselves very, very nicely. I mean, they have aesthetic value, of course, but they were chosen with the church in mind, the dynamic tug between Jesus and Elvis, and they can be used in a worship context, and not just in a Sunday morning service, in small groups, all kinds of, wherever two or three are gathered together, they can be used for reflection, for meditation, all kinds of ways. The plays, there are 5 plays that are published in their entirety. I mean, they're short plays, but in their entirety. And they're relatively easy to do. And if the leader of the congregation doesn't feel comfortable at first with doing something like this, he or she can always draw on the congregation or the community for leadership, and bring it together that way, so that yes, the minister is there, and I've been a minister myself to rejoice in that privilege. Mm-hmm. But it's the ministry of all believers, and this gives all kinds of opportunity for that to happen. The plays, then there's a chapter. What comes after the plays? The plays also include some suggestions of plays and musicals that we've done, and we found that they work particularly well in not just the church context, but community context, Godspell, Jesus Christ, or Godspell, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Footloose, the Canadian play Anne of Green Gables, these are all musicals. Incidentally, if anybody did Godspell, the difficult thing about Godspell is that very little direction is given on how to bring the script alive. And as a result, I have written a small book that addresses this challenge. And I left in this book, I indicated the www.spotlightongodspell.com. People could contact me through that, or in the case with your students, they'd be more than welcome to just contact me directly. And I'm such a little Godspell freak that I wouldn't sell the book to them. I would give it to them if they were really sincere about wanting to produce a show. Because let me tell you, if Godspell is produced half decently within its own context, there's nothing quite like it. The great thing about Joseph, of course, when we did Joseph, we had adults and teenagers on stage joining in together in a big way. And then the children who took part sat, we do all our plays in theater in the round, and they sat on the stage, just sort of right in front of the people in the first row. And they were all an integral part, because as you know, in Joseph, the music just keeps on and on and on. So the kids sang, and the young adults and the older adults were acting and singing on stage.
Mm-hmm. So one of the great things about, in terms of this book as resources, is that it encourages people to think creatively about what they can do at church. So that church certainly is a place of worship, but it can also be a place of performance that's provocative and that gets people thinking about who we are as human beings and what purpose do we have in this life in relationship to God and to each other, and indeed to the whole creation. And I think that's one of the powers of this book.
Well, it's certainly been one of the powers of drama in particular in my life. When I think of all the relationships, many of them from within the church, but some of them beyond the church, and nobody really cared whether it was in or out. The fact of the matter is, these relationships were so important, and not just in a happy-go-lucky way. I think of people who lost spouses during a production and things like that. And once again, you saw the church, koinonia, coming together, maybe in a less conventional way, but whatever. Fellowship was fellowship, but community was community, and it certainly gave rise to that. Anne of Green Gables is it's a wonderful musical. It must be done. I know it's done in America as well as Canada, but it is the one, from my perspective, the one great musical contributed by Canada to the larger world community.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of speaking to my students, but you're going to be listening in, John, at this point. Students at the seminary and beyond, whoever else is participating tonight, is that this book it's an encouragement to go and do likewise in terms of poetry and song and plays and other drama, to be able to say, or to ask the question, how might this speak to our hearts in such a way that it also connects us to God and to each other in ways that are profoundly soulful and spiritual. Because I think as we go through life, as you have done, you've collected along the way some favorite plays, poems, songs, and you're sharing them in this book in a way that, so the book itself as it stands is a good resource, but it's also this encouragement to say, look, you can do this too. That this, as you're thinking about your life of ministry, don't just stick to the prayer books. Don't just stick to the theology books. Be creative. Look for the Elvis of your day, and see who might be speaking to the heart in such a way that it opens us to the mystery and the joy and the sorrow of human life in a way that connects us to each other and to God.
It's true. As you speak, my mind goes back and thinks of all kinds of experiences that we were privileged to have for that very reason and in that very way that you speak of them. I also mentioned Alan Ayckbourn. I single out the British playwright Alan Ayckbourn, so prolific, but the quality is also there. And Ayckbourn, of course, he's much better known in Britain and even in Europe than he is in America. But I wouldn't minimize his impact on America. I mean, in New York, there's an Ayckbourn Avenue. So that says something about how
pretty much get named for an avenue, or get an avenue named for you in New York, you had to do something right.
Okay, but one of his children's plays, Ernie's Incredible Hallucinations, is a very easy play to produce in terms of sets and all the little trinkets that sometimes go along with plays. Ernie is very, very simple, very easy to produce, and it's only one act. It can be done entirely by children, but it can also be, if adults want to join in the mix, and they often do, it can also be done with children and adults. And I would recommend that if anybody was going to do Ayckbourn for the first time, they begin with the children's play and catch the spirit of Ayckbourn, and then go on to some of the plays from the Norman Conquest, Time of My Life, Women in Mine. Permit me just to read what Women in Mine. This play finds Ayckbourn dramatizing one of the greatest problems in churches today: boring clerics. And, granted, I speak as one of them, but even I am not as bad as the vicar in this play. Gerald is writing a 60-page history of his parish and driving his wife crazy, literally, almost every time he opens his mouth. The great sin. I'm mea culpa, boredom, the great sin. Anyway, Susan, his wife, finally decides to cope by conjuring up a fantasy family that consists of an ideal daughter, that's Lucy, perfect husband, Andy, and a charming brother-in-law, Tony. This dream family nicely takes care of Susan's problems until they are torn from her fantasizing mind and replaced by her all too real and grim sister-in-law, Muriel, her religiously fanatical son, Rick, and of course by Gerald. The play ends with Susan slipping away entirely from reality into a delusory state that finds her conflating both the real and the ideal family in a thank you speech that is appropriately nonsensical. Dearest friends, this is Susan talking. Dearest friends, family, my happiest moment has been to stand here with you all and share this, my most precious of days. I grow huge, summer few, bald, Teddy know these two wonderful children, Lucy and Rick. I cannot tell you how heaply cowed I am. And again, Akeburn leaves audiences hardly knowing whether to laugh or to cry. So that's women in mind.
Yeah, and I think sometimes what's helpful is like the people may not know these plays, or a lot of people don't know these plays, and sometimes that can be really refreshing. So that it's and he's in this play as you've described it. The kinds of questions and commentary that can come out from that are rich on all sorts of different levels. And I think that's the power of a drama, is that people are going to enter into it and come out of it in different ways.
Akeburn himself does not profess to be a committed Christian or anything like that, but he burrows so deeply and engagingly, compassionately, and yet also realistically into the heart of things, that there's something special here that Christians especially can appreciate and should appreciate.
Well, I want to share, as we're kind of moving towards the last 10 minutes or so, there was another poem, it happened to be an Updike poem, that I found particularly powerful. My mother died this past February, and it's the loss of a parent is, as I've said to people, my world shifted, and not in a good way. And this Updike poem really spoke to me, and it just speaks to the both the finality of death and yet the power of the life that goes on. It's on page 43. The poem is "Perfection Wasted." I was wondering if you might read that for us, John.
If I may, just by way of introduction, the poem was composed by John Updike in the wake of his mother's death. I used to visit Linda Updike on her farm in Pennsylvania when I was taking summer courses at Princeton. And over the years, I really think a lovely, warm friendship developed, helped no doubt by the fact that I much appreciated her son's work. Anyway, "Perfection Wasted" is a beautiful sonnet in which that grieving son sings the praises of his beloved mother. And I've used this poem at funerals, and it's a very appropriate, very helpful poem in such context. And another regrettable thing about death is the ceasing of your own brand of magic, which took a whole life to develop and market. The quips, the witticisms, the slant adjusted to a few, those loved ones nearest the lip of the stage, their soft faces blanched in the footlight glow, their laughter close to tears, their tears confused with their diamond earrings, their warm, cooled breath in and out with your heartbeat, their response and your performance twinned. The jokes over the phone, the memories packed in the rapid access file, the whole app. Who will do it again? That's it. No one. Imitators and descendants aren't the same.
That's beautiful and powerful. Thank you. I'm going to see if there are any other questions, comments that people might want to make. There was a person who had, let's see, I'm going to go back up here, who had asked, are you saying that Elvis used his talent of singing in other arenas besides the church to reach our Lord's children? What do you think of that, John?
I think there's some truth in that. I don't think we need to paint Elvis as some kind of hidden a saint in disguise. Not sure that there are any real saints amongst us. And the worst kind is the person who comports himself like a saint. And so I don't think that's the point. But the point is that surely that Elvis had a special gift, and he would be the first to say that he didn't make this gift up on his own. He was given the gift. Mm-hmm. And it's really remarkable, and it's remarkable how much lingering effect that gift has had. There was certainly a tragic side of Elvis's life, which had no doubt something to do with his short lifespan. But none of that alters the fact that the gift is there. And I don't think as Christians we should be confusing these gifts with the Lord, but surely we should be rejoicing, and Jesus would be the first to rejoice in any gift. Mm-hmm. You can't imagine him not smiling with over Elvis and Elvis's heyday.
Yeah, despite the preachers who were trying to burn his records and that sort of thing. I think this is, John, what's really wonderful about your book, and I'm going to sort of wrap things up as we are ending our hour together. But what's wonderful about this is that it calls us to recognize those gifts as they come to us in poetry and music, in drama, and to recognize that divine spark that is there in these gifts that come to us, and the people who are entertainers, writers, musicians, that there's something about the joyousness and the beauty of human life that we should celebrate, and that we need to invite into our lives as people of faith.
And I think when I think of your students, and especially your students that are sharing this moment with us, one of the great things in the pastorate is being thrust into a context where you can't help but run into these gifted people. Mm-hmm. and find yourself learning from them, find yourself teaching them something too. But all of that interaction is just lovely. And aren't we grateful? Aren't we fortunate to have that as part and parcel of our life work?
Absolutely. I'd just say amen to that. Thank you so much, John. I'm going to hold the book up, Jesus and Elvis. It's available in a variety of booksellers, online and elsewhere, I'm sure, as well. Thank you so much for taking time to visit with us, John. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful getting to know you. And Nathan, thank you. I'm technically so hopeless that we're sitting here just totally befuddled by how is this going to happen, and then suddenly there everything was, and I realized that had a lot to do with you. I'm I'm not saying that your principal is as hopeless as me when it comes to technology, but you're in a different world, and God bless you, man.
That's one of it. It's just one of many gifts that Nathan brings to the table here at the seminary. So yes, thank you, Nathan. Thank you to all the attendees. Thanks again, John, and be blessed. And thank you so much, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.